Anga Pasavan Atma Naveda Gatim Atmanaha. There are varieties of material existence for the living entity according to the work he performs in ignorance or forgetfulness of his real identity. My dear mother, if anyone enters into that forgetfulness, he is unable to understand where his movements will end. Can I have the seventh canto over here, please? And you can get me the table. What is that sound?
Someone's phone. Well, someone gotta put your phone on silent.
That's someone's phone doing that? Good. Purport by His Divine Grace Srila Prabhupada. If one enters into the continuation of material existence, it is very difficult to get out. Therefore, the Supreme Personality of Godhead comes himself or sends his bona fide representative, and he leaves behind scriptures like Bhagavad Gita and Śrimad Bhāgavatam, so that the living entities hovering in the darkness of nescience may take advantage of the instructions, the saintly persons, and the spiritual masters, and thus be freed. Unless the living entity receives the mercy of the saintly persons, the spiritual master, or Krishna, it is not possible for him to get out of the darkness of material existence. By his own endeavor, it is not possible. Om Jnana Timarandasya Jananjana Shalakaya Chakshuralmitam Jena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhishnam Stapitam Jena Bhutale Svayam Rupa Gadamayam Dadati Svapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shriuta Parakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Saguratam Sahagana Raghunatan Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Shri Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishaka Vidhamscha Hey Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandho Jagatpate Gopisha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Dibyad Bindaranya Kalpadrumada, Śrimad Ratnagara Singhasanasto, Śrimad Radha, Srila Govinda Devo, Prestalabi, Savyamano, Smarami, Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi, Radhe Brindavaneshvari, Vrishabhanu, Sute Devi, Pranamami Hari Priye, Panchakalpadrubhyascha, Kripasandubhyevacha, Titanam, Pavanebhyo, Vaishnavebhyo, Namo Namaha, Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shiva Sadi Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. There are varieties of material existence for the living entity according to the work he performs in ignorance or forgetfulness of his real identity. My dear mother, if anyone enters into that forgetfulness, he is unable to understand where his movements will end. So Srila Prabhupada has repeatedly stressed how important this human form of life is for everyone, saying himself and expressing numerous passages and quotes from the Shastras. Atmaha, if one does not take to Krishna consciousness, spiritual life in his valuable human form, he is the killer of his own soul. Narottam Das Thakur. My dear Lord, I have simply wasted my life having achieved this rare human birth. I have neglected the worship of Radha and Krishna, and thus my life has been spoiled. And Prabhupada is saying how kind the Lord is. He leaves scriptures like Bhagavad Gita and Śrimad Bhāgavatam, and the saintly persons and the spiritual masters. Unless the living entity receives the mercy of the saintly persons, the spiritual master, or Krishna, it's not possible for him to get out of the darkness of material existence. By his own endeavor, it is not possible. When Narada Muni was instructing Maharaj Yudhishthir. There is the chapter 15 of the 7th canto, Instructions for Civilized Human Beings. Otherwise, if one does not take shelter of Achyuta and Baladev, then the senses, acting as the horses, and the intelligence, acting as the driver, both being prone to material contamination. O Lord, this material body is a lump of ignorance, and the senses are networks of paths leading unto death. We see that unless the human being is following the authority of Guru Parampara, by voluntary choice, controlling the mind and senses. One very wonderful devotee, Prabhupada disciple, his name is Brajendra Nandana. His first name was Bob, and at the time of initiation, he was like wanting to get a very nice name and understanding that usually you get, and your name is with matches the first syllable of your given name. So he was thinking Balaram, and then when he was given the name Brajendra Nandana, he had never heard that name before, but when he understood what an amazing name it was, he was very, very pleased. So he would say his main activity through the years was book distribution. And when Srila Prabhupada said, I'm always thinking of the boys in the traveling Sankirtan vans, he was one of those devotees. And he was averse. I remember he was here with us when we established this building in 1982. He was averse to doing anything except directly speaking about the book on the merit of the book based on what Prabhupada was writing in the book. Whereas individually and collectively the movement was drifting, or maybe high speed headlong, you could argue, going away from that. And Prabhupada had said, my books will sell based on their merit. So he also took to heart Prabhupada saying how important the paintings and illustrations in his books were. So he sold countless numbers of Bhagavad Gitas just by opening up to the picture of the chariot and the horses and the senses and the blind intelligence and the hapless soul, whoa, sitting in the back. And he just explaining that, and people got it, and they bought the book. Inadvertently bringing the body, which acts as the chariot, to the path of sense gratification. So unless one is engaged in the mission of the spiritual master, this body is a lump of ignorance, and the senses are a network of paths leading to death. And as it says here, there are varieties of material existence. New York City, varieties of material existence. My friend Janardhan Swami, is now in Vrindavan, but he's from the Philippines, but originally from Canada, Toronto. So he came to Harinam one time a few years ago. We were at Union Square one fine summer day, and he said, and he just expressed to me, Ram Roy, there's just so many kinds of crazy people here. And I looked at him and I said, 8,400,000 different kinds, Maharaj. But ultimately, it seems different externally, but it's all the same thing, forgetfulness of Krishna. Do you ever notice, like, when you preach to someone or someone say, what is this all about, this and that? I find in myself, you're not your body, you're the soul. It's not cars and buses driving down the street. It's people driving the cars and buses. Whether they're this, that, whether their hair is purple or it's green, or they're dressed this, that, they got a ring in their nose or a ring in their head, whatever it is. They look this way, they're straight, they're curved, whatever they are. It comes down to the same thing. They're not even babies. They're just like embryon. They're frozen. They're under the modes of material nature. So there's only one thing to do with this body, in this life, on this planet, and especially at this time, Kali Yuga, and that's join Lord Chaitanya's Sankirtan movement and preach Krishna consciousness under the guidance of such a personality as His Divine Grace, Srila Prabhupada. Then one is saved, then one is freed, and then life makes sense. Otherwise, simply bewilderment. My dear mother, if one enters into that forgetfulness, he is unable to understand where his movements will end. When one is thus attracted again by the rogues of Vishaya, eating, sleeping, and mating, the horses and the chariot driver are thrown into the blinding dark well of material existence, and one again is put into a dangerous and extremely fearful situation of repeated birth and death. These are a series of verses which are just appropriate for the glorification of Lord Balaram, whose appearance day is coming soon, but this is appropriate for this verse today under instruction. Without the protection of Gaur Nitai, Krishna, and Balaram, who is Lord Balaram? The original spiritual master, Adi Guru. He is the Supreme Personality of Servitor Godhead, which means he understands what is devotional service to the supreme degree. Because he is the Prakash Vigraha, he is the expansion of Krishna. Prabhupada would even say, except for the difference in color, there's no difference. There's more difference than that. Imagine if you expanded yourself, and yourself in that expansion, wouldn't you in that expansion know what is best for your original self? I think so. That is Lord Balaram. One cannot get out of the dark well of ignorance of material existence. This is indicated here by the word nochet, which means that one will always remain in the dark well of material existence. The living entity must get strength from Nitai Gaur, or Krishna Balaram. Without the mercy of Nitai Gaur, there is no way. There is no other way. There is no other way. There is no other way. Harer Nam, Harer Nam, Harer Nam, Eva Kevalam. Kalo Nasteva, Nasteva, Nasteva. Gatir, Gatir. Anyata. As stated in the Chaitanya Charitamrita Adi Leela, chapter 1, verse number 2, very important verse, Vande Shri Krishna Chaitanya Nityananda Sodito Godo Dadye Pushpavanto Chitro Sando Tamonudo. I offer my respectful obeisances unto Shri Krishna Chaitanya and Lord Nityananda, who are like the sun and moon. They have arisen simultaneously on the horizon of Gauda to dissipate the darkness of ignorance and thus wonderfully bestow benediction upon all. This Sankirtan movement is the prime benediction for humanity at small, medium, large. That means everyone. And we say every morning, full of compassion for they can fulfill the desires of a few people, 3 or 4, 5 or 6, 30 people in a classroom, everyone. Hina China Jatahilo Harinam Udarilo. Their method is Harinam Sankirtan. Who has read Madhya Leela chapter 7, the Lord's tour of the holy places, his travels in South India? Prabhupada describes, if one studies the method of how Lord Chaitanya converted masses of people to prema bhakti, then one can actually understand what is the potency of the holy name of Krishna. Lord Chaitanya, widely renowned as a scholar in his youth, he left the task to delineate the philosophy. What is that sound? Who's responsible for that sound? Or is that the front doorbell ringing? It's really obnoxious. Anyway, we tolerate, just like everything else out there. But in the temple. Maybe we could have a...
Yeah.
What was I saying?
Majulila chapter 7.
Yes.
Going there. We can study that and see. I forgot what we can see.
We can see the power of
Huh? Speak loud. Yes. Yes. Yeah, Shashastakam. So he left the task to write about the philosophy and delineate it down the line, the cyclic succession according to time, place, and circumstance. 16th century, 17th century, 18th century, 19th century, 20th century, and lo and behold, here we are in the first quarter of the 21st century. Wow. But he himself simply engaged in performing Harinam Sankirtan as his main activity. This is God doing this. How important is this process? It is the Yuga Dharma. There is no other Yuga Dharma for anyone for the next 427,000 years. Thus wonderfully bestow benediction upon all. Rising tide in the harbor raises some of the boats, 3 or 4, all the boats. That the Srila Prabhupada is coming, as we will hear, raised the tide, raised the water level on this planet. The fallen soul in this dark well must take shelter of the lotus feet of Gaur Nitai, and thus he can easily emerge from material existence. Without their strength, simply attempting to get out of the clutches of matter by speculative knowledge will be insignificant. One very amazing person came to the temple yesterday, a nice young woman from northern Georgia. And anyway, long story short, she's frustrated looking for answers. She brought up in a Christian background and at the same time got involved in what is called Kriya Yoga, which stems from Paramahamsa Yogananda, who was a Mayavadi who came to the United States in the 1920s and has some type of quasi-disciplic succession. And she was just walking by on the street, and Divyangi, she saw the lotus flowers painted on the sidewalk and thought, I have to come inside and see what this is all about. Okay? So keep them bright, it's nice. We did a revision, and like there was done Janmashtami a year ago, and then you freshened it up for Gaur Pranim? Oh, really? Just recently, okay. Because every other sidewalk that you walk on is just another sidewalk, And just tired, just at this section, Devahudi, I'm sick of the senses, sick of the disturbance caused by material senses. How can I get out of this? Without their strength, simply by attempting to get out of the clutches of matter by speculative knowledge will be insignificant. And one more very nice verse. We are indulging ourselves. We will be hard-pressed to stay within the time limit, but we'll give it the old college try. Where is it? This is later. The spiritual master should be considered to be directly the Supreme Lord because he gives knowledge for enlightenment. Consequently, for one who maintains the material conception that the spiritual master is an ordinary human being, everything is frustrated. His enlightenment and his Vedic studies and knowledge are like the bathing of an elephant. One should strictly adhere to the instructions of the spiritual master, for if he is pleased, certainly the personality of Godhead is pleased. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prastaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swami Niti Namane. Namaste, Sarasvati Deve, Gauravani Pacharane, Nirvishesha Sunyavadi, Paskita Deshatarane. I offer my respectful obeisances unto His Divine Grace, Srila Prabhupada, who is very dear to Lord Krishna on this earth, having taken shelter at the feet of the Transcendental Lord. Obeisances unto you, O spiritual master, O servant of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati. You are so kindly teaching the message of Lord Chaitanya Dev and are delivering these Western countries which are filled with impersonalism and voidism. The Lower East Side has a history of change and human suffering as old as New York. 300 years before Prabhupada's arrival, it had been a part of Peter Stuyvesant's estate. Who here has ever been in the Delancey Street subway station and observed the beautiful mosaic on the wall of the northbound platform of the F train? Who has even done Harinam in that spot? Raise their hand. This is Peter Stuyvesant's peach orchard, if you can imagine. Bowery literally means farmland or farm lane, like farms, little farms. Today's landmark of Tompkins Square Park had formerly been a salt marsh known as Stuyvesant Swamp. Charming. The lower, we announced verbally, but then Nata Bhargaranga pointed out to me, which I had thought of in my mind, today would be an appropriate day to go to, and we will, Tompkins Square Park for Harinam on ISKCON Incorporation anniversary.
Hooray.
So I'm verbally saying, and it's also there on your device. The Lower East Side had become a slum in the 1840s when thousands of Irish immigrants driven by the Irish potato famine came and settled. 2 decades later, the Irish became the image of the American to the next immigrants, the Germans, who gradually grew in number to become the largest immigrant group in New York City. There's even a section on the East Side called Germantown, still this day, and people who, ancestors, who gradually grew in number, yes. Next came Eastern European Jews from Poland and Ukraine, other parts of Russia. And by 1900, the Lower East Side had become the most densely populated Jewish ghetto in the world. So if you walk around the neighborhood there, East Village, Alphabet City, you'll see remnants of some old Jewish synagogues. But in the next generation, the ghetto began to break up as Jews moved to the suburbs and economic advancement. Next, the Puerto Ricans thronged in. Hundreds and thousands in the 1950s immigrating from their island poverty or moving in from East Harlem. Then they and the blacks from Harlem and Bedford-Stuyvesant arrived next, where the new groups who, along with the Poles and Ukrainians, populated the 2 square miles of tenements and crowded streets that formed the Lower East Side slums in the 1960s. You still see on 2nd Avenue, Ukrainian Credit Union, and on 7th Street, between 2nd Avenue and 3rd Avenue is the Ukrainian Museum, which actually doubles as a kind of embassy. I know Ananda Bihari used to work there some years ago, for example. Then, only a few years before Prabhupada's arrival, a different kind of slum dweller had appeared on the Lower East Side. Although there had been many sociological and cultural analyses of this phenomena, it remains ultimately inexplicable why they suddenly came. We know why they came, but the mundaners can't understand. Like a vast flock of birds swooping down, or like animals in a great instinctual migration, and why after a few years, they vanished. Young people there now are not at all like the ones that were there 58 years ago. At first, the newcomers were mostly young artists, musicians, and intellectuals, similar to the hip crowd of Prabhupada's Bowery days. Then came the young middle-class dropouts, because living space was more available and rents were lower than in nearby Greenwich Village. West Village, Greenwich Village is, higher money and higher class, whereas the East Village was lower. But if you go uptown, it's reversed. Upper East Side is more high class than the Upper West Side. Slightly more. Anyway. So the rents were lower, so they concentrated here on the Lower East Side, which in the parlance of the renting agents became known as the East Village. So the whole area was called the Lower East Side up until the 1960s. Then the East Village was so designated. Lower East Side is specifically and technically below Houston Street. This is good for those who are to know these things if coming to live here and know your city. Many even came without finding a place to live and camped in the hallways of tenements, drawn by cheap rent and the promise of bohemian freedom. These young middle-class dropouts, the avant-garde of a nationwide youth movement, soon to be known in the media as hippies, wandered the Lower East Side slums in living protest against America's good life of materialism. As if responding to an instinctual call, younger teenage runaways joined the older hippies. Following the runaways came the police counselors, social and welfare workers, youth hostels, and drug counseling centers. On St. Mark's Place, a new hip commercialism sprang up with head shops, poster shops, record shops, art galleries, and bookstores that carried everything from cigarette papers to hip clothes and psychedelic lighting. The hippies journeyed to the Lower East Side in full conviction that this was the place to be, just as their immigrant predecessors had done. For the European immigrants of another age, New York Harbor had been the gateway to a land of riches and opportunity, as they at long last set their eyes on Manhattan's skyline and the Statue of Liberty. Now, in 1966, American youth thronged to New York City with hopes of their own and feasted on the vision of their newfound mystical land, the Lower East Side slums. You can turn anything from sand into gold if your desire and your vision and your tent is right. And as they were being inspired by Super Soul to come there to get the mercy of their chosen, the Lord's chosen, empowered Shaktivesh avatar to fulfill the hope and dreams of pure devotees for hundreds and thousands of years as Divine Grace Srila Prabhupada, they were sent there. The hippies had turned from the suburban materialism of their parents, the inane happiness of TV and advertising, the ephemeral goals of middle-class America. They were disillusioned by parents, teachers, clergy, public leaders, and the media, dissatisfied with American policy in Vietnam, and allured by radical political ideologies that exposed America as a cruel, selfish, exploitative giant who must now reform or die. And they were searching for real love, real peace, real existence, and real spiritual consciousness. By the summer of Srila Prabhupada's arrival at 26 Second Avenue, the first front of the great youth rebellion of the 60s had already entered the Lower East Side. Here they were free to live in simple poverty and express themselves through art, music, drugs. The talk was of spiritual searching. LSD and marijuana were the keys, opening new realms of awareness. Notions about Eastern cultures and Eastern religions were in vogue. All of a sudden they're in vogue? Why? How? Through drugs, yoga, brotherhood, or just by being free. Somehow they would attain enlightenment. Everyone was supposed to keep an open mind and develop his own cosmic philosophy by direct experience and drug-expanded consciousness. Shyamasundar recounts that when Lord Jagannath made his appearance in Haight-Ashbury, Prabhupada was so amazed that he called San Francisco New Jagannath Puri. And he had Shyamasundar, who was an expert carpenter, carved the original Jagannath deities. They're still there to this day. He also carved for London, now situated in Soho Street, and I think other places also. And Shyamasundar is only in Haight-Ashbury in 1967. We just tell to all these young people, this is God. Yeah, man, cool, I can dig it, okay, you know. If you tried to, say during the 1930s, try to tell people like that, they would like, you know, have you burned at the stake as a heretic, as a heathen, blasphemer. Everyone was supposed to keep an open mind and develop his own cosmic philosophy by direct experience and drug-expanded consciousness, blended with his own eclectic readings. And if their lives appeared aimless, at least they had dropped out of a pointless game where the player sells his soul for material goods and in this way supports a system that is already rotten. So it was that in 1966, thousands of young people were walking the streets of the Lower East Side, not simply intoxicated or crazy, though they often were. You can hear the memories of His Holiness Prabhupada Das. His name is
Bhakti Damodar Vrat.
Bhakti Damodar Bratmar. Okay, he was formerly Lon Solomon, and his testimony is also in his books, and by his own admission, he was one of these crazy people wandering the streets. He later became Prabhupada's initiated disciple some years later, and he was introduced to Srila Prabhupada in Philadelphia by Brahmananda, who of course was there at the time, and said, but Prabhupada, it wasn't really reported to him properly that he joined at 26 Second Avenue, maybe 61 Second Avenue, and Brahmananda introduced him. This is Prabhupada Das. He was there in the beginning and he was crazy. Oh, no, the Brahmananda didn't say that, but Prabhupada Maharaj trying to remind Prabhupada of their exchange back in 1966. I was really crazy back then. And Prabhupada's eyes got big and looked at him and said, oh, are you still crazy now? Not simply intoxicated or crazy, though they often were, but in search of life's ultimate answers, in complete disregard of the establishment and the day-to-day life pursued by millions of straight Americans. That the prosperous land of America could breed so many discontented youth surprised Prabhupada. Of course, it also further proved that material well-being, the hallmark of American life, couldn't make people happy. So America was the top dog, top of the heap, the British lion in traction, his paraplegic traction in the hospital bed after being bankrupt fighting the Nazis in World War II. And you can imagine how Indians felt about that. Great. And now America, you know, America is like the older brother. Hey, we got rid of the British like 150 years ago before you guys, you know. So now America, that's when Indians, they didn't want to come to London anymore, they wanted to come to the United States of America. So when Prabhupada brought his American and European white-bodied boys and girls to India, the Indian people, especially the ones who had lived through British rule, independence movement, and the horrible partition of India and Pakistan, and you know, what the country had become under personalities like Pandit Nehru. So what Srila Prabhupada was doing, they were just so deeply impressed. Many of them, you hear Giriraj Swami tell the story, they were moved to tears. Swami Bhaktivedanta has gotten proper revenge for all the subjugation we suffered at the hands of the Padres. Here's the Spanish word. The hallmark of material life, material well-being, couldn't make people happy. And actually, Giriraj Swami, that was Prabhupada would use him as an example. His father is a multimillionaire. He was offered $1 million to leave me and come home. Even his parents came and asked Srila Prabhupada, we will give you $1 million. Let our son come home. And he turns to Giriraj Swami. Giriraj, I'm not keeping him here by force. He's here by voluntary. Giriraj, what do you say? Nothing doing. I'm not leaving. He didn't say like that, but... And Prabhupada said, see, what can I do? For the atheist, death is the ultimate God realization. Your money, your skyscraper building, your aristocratic position, your influence over others, your false pride, all finished. Now one has to believe. Prabhupada spoke that in his garden in Los Angeles to the scholars, religious theologian scholars from Southern California. You can see that on the videos taken by Yadubar and Vishaka. Prabhupada did not see the unhappiness around him in terms of the immediate social, political, economic, and cultural causes. Neither slum conditions nor youth rebellions were the all-important realities. They were mere symptoms of a universal unhappiness to which the only cure was Krishna consciousness. He sympathized with the miseries of everyone, but he saw the universal solution. Prabhupada had not made a study of the youth movement in America before moving to the Lower East Side. His godbrother discouraged him. You know, you can't come to America and be taken seriously without the backing of a prestigious organization. And people in general don't come to meetings anymore. This is 1959, he's being told this when he wanted to take sannyas. Everything is done through the medium of television. Wow. So Prabhupada certainly, of course, didn't take those words at all seriously. He was just followed the order of his spiritual master. He had never made even specific plans to come here amid so many young people, but in the 10 months since Calcutta, he had been moved by force of circumstances, or as he understood it, by, quote, Krishna's will, unquote, from one place to another. Certainly, that's the answer. On the order of his spiritual master, he had come to America, and by Krishna's will, he had come to the Lower East Side. His mission here was the same as if it had been on the Bowery or Uptown or even in India. He was fixed in the order of his spiritual master in the Vedic view, a view that wasn't going to be influenced by radical changes of the 1960s. Now, if it so happened that these young people, because of some change in the American cultural climate, were to prove more receptive to him, then that would be welcome, and that would also be by Krishna's will. Actually, because of the ominous influence of the Kali millennium, this was historically the worst of times for spiritual cultivation, hippie revolution or not. And Srila Prabhupada was trying to transplant Vedic culture into a more alien ground that had had any previous spiritual master. So he expected to find his work extremely difficult. Yet in this generally bad age, just prior to Prabhupada's arrival on the Lower East Side, tremors of dissatisfaction and revolt against the Kali Yuga culture itself began vibrating through American society, sending waves of young people to wander the streets of New York City's Lower East Side in search of something beyond the ordinary life, looking for alternatives, seeking spiritual fulfillment. These young people, broken from their stereotyped materialistic backgrounds and drawn together now on New York's Lower East Side, were the ones who were by chance or choice or destiny to become the congregation for the Swami's storefront offerings of kirtan and spiritual guidance. So we had the luxury last night to read everything I wanted to, but to keep within our confines, we will skip to Mr. Goldsmith, Stephen Goldsmith, a young Jewish lawyer with a wife and 2 children and an office on Park Avenue, was interested in spiritual movements when Carl Jurgens, where Prabhupada stayed for a week or so after fleeing the Bowery loft, told him about Prabhupada's plans, he was immediately fascinated by the idea of setting up a religious corporation for an Indian Swami. He visited Prabhupada at 26 Second Avenue, and they discussed incorporation, tax exemption, Prabhupada's immigration status, and Krishna consciousness. One evening, having completed all the legal groundwork and being ready to complete the procedures for incorporation, Mr. Goldsmith came to Prabhupada's lecture in Kirtan to get signatures for the trustees for his new society. So Prabhupada says, all right, the conclusion, Mr. Goldsmith, you can ask anything. Mr. Goldsmith stands, so they had one metal folding chair, which was reserved for higher class or older guests or those who couldn't sit on the floor. That was their one piece of luxuriant furniture. Makes a short announcement asking for signers on an incorporation document for the Swami's new religious movement. So Bill, Raphael, Don, James Green. Don and Raphael were just kind of like homeless drifters. And just to get things going in the beginning, Srila Prabhupada, any young man could stay in the storefront if they simply did not break the regulative principles while in the storefront. That was and these two guys would like go out and wander the streets and, pick up like half-smoked cigarettes from the sidewalk and like that. And there was no money, and Prabhupada said, you should maybe try to get some money. And this is July. And he said, well, in harvest time and up in New England, I can make some money picking apples. Okay, that's some kind of vague idea, months in the future. As the meeting breaks up, those called on to sign as trustees come forward, standing around in a little storefront, waiting to leaf curiously through the pages the lawyer had produced from his thin attaché at the signer's direction. Yet not a soul among them is committed to Krishna consciousness. Mr. Goldsmith meets his quota of signers, a handful of sympathizers with enough reference toward the Swami to want to help him. First trustees will hold office for a year. Michael Grant, now Mukunda Maharaj, and his girlfriend, Janaki, the younger sister of Yamuna Devi. They sign. Doesn't even look at the papers that he's signing. He just signs it. No one seriously intends to undertake any formal duties as trustee of the religious society, but they are happy to help the Swami by signing his fledgling society into legal existence. None of them know exactly why half a dozen what a half a dozen legal-sized type pages mean, except Swamiji is forming a society. Why? For tax exemption, in case someone gives a big donation. And for other benefits an official religious society might receive. But those purposes hardly seem urgent or even relevant to the present situation. Who's going to make donations? Except for maybe Mr. Goldsmith, who has any money. But Prabhupada is planning for the future, and he's planning for more than just tax exemption. He's trying to serve his spiritual predecessors and fulfill the scriptural prediction of a spiritual movement that is to flourish for 10,000 years in the midst of the age of Kali. Within the vast Kali age, the 1960s are but an insignificant moment. The Vedas describe that the time of the universe revolves through a cycle of 4 seasons or yugas, and Kali Yuga is the worst of times in which all spiritual qualities of men diminish until humanity is finally reduced to a bestial civilization devoid of human decency. However, the Vedic literature foretells a golden age of spiritual life beginning after the advent of Lord Chaitanya and lasting for 10,000 years, an eddy that runs against the current of Kali Yuga, with a vision that soars off to the end of the millennium and beyond, yet with his feet solidly on the ground of Second Avenue. Prabhupada begun an international society for Krishna consciousness. His many practical responsibilities, paying the rent, incorporating his society, and paving the way for a thriving worldwide congregation of devotees. He doesn't see the humble beginning as limiting the greater scope of his divine mission. He knows that everything depends on Krishna, and whether he succeeds or fails, it is up to the Supreme. He has only to try. The purposes stated within ISKCON's Articles of Incorporation reveal Prabhupada's thinking. 1, to systematically propagate spiritual knowledge to society at large and to educate all peoples in the techniques of spiritual life in order to check the imbalance of values in life and to achieve real unity and peace in the world. 2, to propagate a consciousness of Krishna as it is revealed in the Bhagavad Gita and Śrimad Bhāgavatam. 3, to bring the members of the society together with each other and nearer to Krishna, the prime entity, thus to develop the idea within the members and humanity at large that each soul is part and parcel of the quality of Godhead, Krishna. To teach and encourage the Sankirtan movement, congregational chanting of the holy name of God, as revealed in the teachings of Lord Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. 5, to erect for the members and for society at large a holy place of transcendental pastimes dedicated to the personality of Krishna. 6, to bring the members closer together for the purpose of teaching a simpler and more natural way of life. And 7, with a view towards achieving the aforementioned purposes, to publish and distribute periodicals, magazines, books, and other writings. Regardless of what ISKCON's charter members thought of the society's purposes, Prabhupada saw them as imminent realities. As Mr. Rubin, the subway conductor who had met Prabhupada on a Manhattan Park bench the year previously, had noted, he seemed to know that they would have temples filled up with devotees, that there are temples and books, he said, they're existing, they're here, but time is separating us from them. It was not that a new religion was being born in July of 1966. Rather, the eternal preaching of Godhead, known as Sankirtan, was being transplanted from east to west. The society's members, Rudyard Kipling, 100 years earlier, had written some poetry. He was, like a typical British kind of Anglo-Saxon racist kind of fellow. He had written a very derogatory poem called The White Man's Burden. Look it up if you want. And he said, East is east and west is west, and never the twain shall meet. The final volume of Lilamrita, uniting two worlds. The triumphant Monday, July 19th, 1976, New York Times, with beautiful pictures of the Rath Yatra. They interviewed one Indian person, said, we always say that America, New York, no other place would give us freedom for our religious expression. We just saw something that Bhaktivinoda Maharaj was preaching in Russia and was arrested. They have a new law that foreigners cannot preach to the people in Russia. And he's being held for 10 days, which I think 3 or 4 have already elapsed, and then he's going to be deported from the country, for example. East and West combined. The society's members would join together, and by hearing the teachings of Bhagavad Gita and Śrimad Bhāgavatam, and by chanting the Hare Krishna Mahamantra, they would come to realize that each was a spirit soul eternally related to Krishna. They would then preach this to humanity at large, especially through Sankirtan, the chanting of the holy name of God. Preaching is ultimately meant to get everyone to join Lord Chaitanya's Sankirtan movement and chant and dance in ecstatic love of God. ISKCON would also erect the holy place of transcendental pastimes dedicated to the personality of Krishna. Was this something beyond the storefront? Yes, certainly. He never thought small. Prabhupada said, my fault is that I could never think small. And just see how Prabhupada's ISKCON, his movement, is so much bigger in scope and in practical everything than any other movement coming from or claiming to be representing Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. If your desire is to please Krishna and make it that big, Krishna will be very happy. As we were hearing today in Prahlad Maharaj's prayers to Lord Nrsimhadev, he's very pleased to award them fulfillment of all desires. Those Vishnu forms, by their glancing, protected the devotees from the modes of passion and ignorance, lust, greed, and actually created ever new variegating desires when the cowherd boys and calves transformed into Vishnu forms because they were Krishna himself after Lord Brahma stole the original set. So the glancing, so we receive the glance of the Lord, and it creates desires to love him and to serve him. Similarly, a devotee desired, let there be a temple and seva, and what was once an empty corner has now become a great transcendental place of pilgrimage. It's Krishna Balaram Mandir. And all temples, ultimately, just like this temple, it is meant to be the beacon of light for everyone who lives in this region, 14 million people, and everyone who travels here from all over the world. I'll have to research the number, but the number in my head, 40 to 60 million tourists come through this city every year. 40 to 60 million. Holy place of pilgrimage, simply more way of life, and all of these 6 purposes would be accomplished by book distribution. Certainly none of the signers saw any immediate shape to the Swami's dream, yet these 7 purposes were not simply theistic rhetoric intended to convince a few New York State government officials. Prabhupada meant to enact each and every one of them. Of course, he was now working. How's everybody doing? We're coming to an end. We're coming to the end. Maybe 2 minutes. Hold on. Of course, he was now working in extremely limited circumstances. The principal place of worship, located at 26 2nd Avenue in the city, county, and state of New York, was the sole headquarters for the International Society of Krishna Consciousness. Yet Prabhupada insisted that he was not living at 22nd Avenue, New York City. His vision was transcendental. Similarly, the place of worship, 26 2nd Avenue, was not a New York storefront, a former curiosity shop. The storefront and the apartment had been spiritualized and were now a transcendental haven. Society at large could come here. The whole world could take shelter here, regardless of race or religion. Plain, small, and impoverished as it was, Prabhupada regarded the storefront as a holy place of transcendental pastime dedicated to the personality of Krishna. It was a world headquarters, a publishing house, a sacred place of pilgrimage, and a center from which an army of devotees could issue forth and chant the holy names of God in all the streets of the world. The entire universe could receive Krishna consciousness from the International Society for Krishna Consciousness, which was beginning here. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. International Society for Krishna Consciousness, Srila Prabhupada Society Ki Jai. Shri Shri Radha Govinda Ki Jai. Nitai Gaur Premanandi Hari Hari Bol.
Grace Ram Roy Prabhu Ki.